Hi everyone, welcome to our first interview today. I've got with me Ketki Thosar. She is a psychologist and works with the Symbiosis International University as a counselor. Ketki's work has been mostly with young adults and adults, and before this, she was working with a rehabilitation facility. Ketki today is going to talk to us a little bit about emotional dysregulation, and with that, welcome Ketki to my first ever interview.
Thank you. I'm extremely honored that you chose me for this because I know what a big deal this is. And I'm truly, truly thankful to you for actually inviting me here today. And I feel lucky and blessed that I get to do this with you because you're not just an old colleague of mine, but you're also a very, very close friend. And I've had the privilege to not just know you as a friend, but also as a colleague and as a working professional. And I must say that both those journeys have been absolutely fun and exciting.
Yeah, Ketki and I go back some time, and it's exciting because uh, I think you're an excellent therapist, and that's why I wanted you here today to talk to me
Very kind.
and to talk to our audience today about emotional dysregulation. So I'll start with my
Absolutely.
first question. Um, what essentially is emotional dysregulation when we're talking about it in terms of looking at it in the field?
In the field, primarily, we see this as a representation of not being able to manage oneself. So that's the most common thing I think I've come across when clients come in and say that everything is messed up and I'm not able to manage myself. I can't control my thoughts and emotions. It's just too much, is another sentence I hear very often. And these are the common things in which people come in with, and emotional dysregulation is often something that is not recognized by people. It's always thought of as I have too many thoughts, or I end up fixating on certain thoughts, or I can't move past this. So rather than recognizing it as just dysregulation or not being able to manage and mitigate the different emotional experiences that we have as individuals, we end up understanding it as an inability on our part, that there's something that I am not able to do. Or there are also people who say that these things keep happening to me, where then it gets projected outward that these things keep happening to me, therefore I feel like this. So this is primarily how emotional dysregulation is seen in the field.
That's how we usually see it, right? That's how it presents itself when clients come to us for sessions, and we often find that it's usually the thought that they're fixating on, and which is where we do a lot of work with thought. And I thought that that's perhaps something you could shed a little light on is when we're working with emotional dysregulation, what's the kind of work that we end up doing with our clients?
With emotional dysregulation, and this is something I often use as you know a model or a framework to actually explain to clients in terms of how they can better manage their emotions. So I'm sure some of your viewers and your audience might be quite familiar with this, especially if they have an understanding in the field of psychology, which is the cognitive school of thought, right? And this is a school of thought that's been researched very widely and all across the world, whether it's the West or the East. And it's been found to be the most robust school of thought in terms of, how well it explains different parts of mental health. So, keeping this in mind, and of course, there are many schools of thought, but essentially, when all of them are saying the same thing, is that our mind consists of the various thoughts that we have, the different beliefs and perceptions that we have, uh, the multitude of emotions that we all experience at different points in our life and in different ways, and all the actions or the behaviors in which these translate into. right? So when we talk about emotional dysregulation and the work that we do when it comes to the fixation on thought, it is to check and become mindful of what kind of thought follows or precedes a certain emotional experience. So whenever there's a particular stressor in your environment, or if there's any incident or event which is leading to an emotional upheaval, whichever emotion, whether it is the emotion that leads to a certain set of thoughts, or whether it is a certain idea and perception of that event or situation that leads to certain emotions coming up. So, checking and bringing to our own awareness, our conscious awareness, what kind of thoughts come up as an automatic reaction to the perception of anything that might be happening. So, and this is an area that is very widely worked on when a therapist is using an approach from the cognitive school of thought. Because as we grow up as individuals, right from childhood, the various experiences that we have, these have an influence and sometimes even major impacts on the way we form our perceptions. And often, if the experiences that we've had have not been ideal or have not been healthy, right, that leads to a lot of distortion in the way these beliefs and perceptions get formed.
What isn't stressed enough is doing the work that your therapist tells you to do, right? And even when it comes to something like emotional dysregulation, so there is this concept of homework that you're asked to do. And a lot of times I've had clients ask me if is it necessary for me to go ahead and do this homework, and then why am I coming in for a session if I have to do homework? um, so I was hoping that you could perhaps enlighten the audience a little bit about why homework, as we put it, is so critical to therapy.
And I see that a lot also in the clients that I work with, whether they are young adults or adults, or the rare occasion where I've had a chance to interact with a child in therapy. Homework forms a very crucial part because the therapy space that you share with your therapist as a client is a space where you are trying to do the rewiring, and it's your workspace, right? It's the table on which you take apart a certain problem or a certain issue that you're trying to resolve, and you're trying to gain a deeper perspective of it in that space with your therapist. You know, bearing in mind that this is your own personal experience and your therapist is offering you that kind of objectivity and insight, right? Or guidance in developing that insight. And that space is essentially for you to take apart or draw connections or reflect on what kinds of associations are being formed. But this is just the space of ideating and reflection. And often the translation of this into real life application needs to happen in the spaces where these experiences have first taken place, which is, for instance, if I have a concern and I bring it into my therapist that I'm unable to regulate the kind of irritability that comes up for me when I'm at home or when I'm interacting with a certain family member, for me to actually apply the skills that I'm possibly ideating and learning from my therapist, the best thing to do is to do it in the field, which is your life, or with that interaction with that family or family member or your friend, right? So, if let's say you and your therapist work on figuring out how to contain immediate jump to irritability, which is so often a very debilitating situation for you because you might not want to actually do that, right? Your intention might not be to actually lash out or snap at your loved one, but that ends up happening as a very reflex action on your part. So you and your therapist are probably going to work out things to do to better mitigate those immediate thoughts and emotions that do tend to come up. And the place that you can practice them is outside of that therapy space, which is why homework, or rather, another word or another term that I recently came across while doing a training was seeing the progression of your solutions, right? So seeing, sort of doing like an audit or a review on how well you're using these skills. That is really essential, because only once you use it in the field will you be able to understand what the glitches are, what the bugs are, and then bring them back to that therapy space to, sort of review and rewire. So homework forms a very crucial part because of this, because it helps you identify the bugs that need to be fixed in even the techniques, because these are techniques that you are curating for your own subjective experiences. And besides that, I think another reason why homework forms a very crucial aspect of therapy is because just speaking about or ideating on the problems or the issues that you might be facing isn't enough. It's also about how it will translate into application, right? And when you do that on a daily basis or on a regular basis, if not a daily basis, and you try to use it and practice it as much, then the likelihood that these changes will happen will be much more, right? Because it's like when you learn how to ride a bike, the more you practice it, even if you fall a couple of times and bruise your knee, the better you get at it, right? So I think the practice and the consistency with constantly going back to that technique and going back to those new mechanisms is what also perpetuates your therapy journey.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Um, okay, so my next question about emotional dysregulation is that it's an extremely common, it's something very common to a lot of us. All right. To a point where we are mildly irritated by, say, a slow rickshaw in front of us when we're driving a car or riding a bike. But what essentially, when is it that you need to take a look at it and say, okay, I think this needs to be worked on, I think this is something that needs my attention? When does that sort of point come in?
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant question, Ashna, because all of us do experience emotions at varying intensities. You and I have had lots of experiences where we do this, right? And we experience our emotions in a very heightened state, usually when things mean more to us, right? So when, let's say, if you like lose a pen, right, you might not really be that annoyed or irritated. But if you lose a pen that was maybe gifted to you by someone special, or it was a very expensive pen, or it was a pen you're very comfortable writing with, the emotions that might pop up might be much more intense. And remember, we're still doing the same thing, we're losing a pen, but the value of what that loss meant to us sort of determines the kind of emotions that we experience. But the question that you asked about, at what point do we actually need to check in and see whether, this needs professional help, or this needs perspective on why these certain emotions might be popping up, is when they start causing more maladaptive consequences for you than adaptive, right? Because all emotions, whether positive or negative, and we often tend to sort of ostracize these negative emotions, but all of these emotions, they are essentially carriers of messages for us from our mind, right? So when you lose something, or if you even lose a pen, that irritability is a message from your mind telling you that that was something valuable and you lost it. So maybe the next time when you're using something that's valuable, like stationery, which is very valuable to me because I'm a stationery head, right? Like, I love my stationery. So when every time I use something that's my favorite pen, or one of those cute mini so pens that I end up splurging all my money on, so every time I use those, I'm more mindful of how carefully I keep them back in my bag, or if I'm letting someone else borrow them, right? So it's a message from your mind to tell you that, keep a check on what means more to you, and, become more aware. And when these emotions, when they pop up for us in these intense states, when they start affecting the way we are functioning or the way we are thinking, and to the point where these effects then translate into behavior, which is not just behavior that might be influencing us at that moment, but also impacting the people, the things around us, or things for us in the future, right? It's important then to check. And if you sort of get a bird's eye view on all the times where these intense emotions have had these influences on your behaviors or on your ability to function and move ahead, and if you realize that the amount of maladaptiveness in this is more than the adaptiveness of this, and it's not really working in your favor, it's taking you two steps backward on the journey of life. um, it's important at that point to like pause and reflect as to why that might be happening. And it's okay to not know the answer as well, right? Because we're often not taught these things. And it's okay to not know these answers. And it's okay at that point to seek out guidance from a professional, someone who is trained in mental health, because it will help you form the right insights when you are trying to figure these different aspects of yourself out. Because we often tend to just go to our loved ones and our friends because we are comfortable speaking with them rather than with a stranger, right? But all of our loved ones and friends, while their intentions might be in the right place, they're going to speak to you and share space with you from their experiences. And that is great. It's amazing to have that kind of social support. But it's only going to offer you a sense of validation that these experiences are real, but not really provide that, objective insight for you, which will actually happen in a mental health or therapeutic setting with a professional. So while your loved ones can offer you all the support and the nurturance for those emotions that are coming up, it's a mental health professional, whether it's your therapist or a psychiatrist, that might be able to offer you a more bird's eye perspective on what is happening and what needs to be amended, so as to make sure that the similar dysfunctions that are popping up as a result of these very heightened emotions don't happen.
Super. That was very insightful. Thank you. Actually, I have two questions on this. One is that why is it that more and more of us have started to become less tolerant of situations around us and tend to feel so strongly about so much more than what really affects us directly? That's the first question. And my second question is, um, two things that you would perhaps like to tell the audience in terms of what they could do for self care.
Those are very brilliant questions, and I'm going to try and actually give you the answer for both of them together because they are interconnected. And the first thing is that you asked me about the tolerance, right? How easy it has become now, especially for young adults today, to experience those very heightened emotions about matters that might not really have a direct impact on them. They might be the most trivial things happening in their ecosystems, no matter which ecosystem that is, whether it's work, school, home, their social relationships, regardless, right? Um, our reactions, whether in thought, in speech, in emotions, are as if we are actually part of that small trivial matter, right? And that's often because, and from the work that I see, it's often because of the amount of unexpressed emotions that we might have associated to this trivial matter. So, for instance, if you are at a social gathering, you're at a party, and you hear someone mention how some third person's partner treated their partner a certain way, right? Something that isn't even directly maybe influencing your friend who you're speaking to, right? You might become very agitated or very into a very heightened state of whatever emotion pops up based on the situation, because it's likely that the emotions that other person might have felt, the person who is part of that actual experience, maybe those are emotions you might have felt at some point in your life for any situation, which might not have been resolved, right? And they might not have chance to express themselves. They might not have gotten a chance to exist in your consciousness. And because those heightenings can be so debilitating and so crippling, and because we have this need to move ahead and adapt and function and be at our best, we often tend to repress these emotions. And this is a practice that we learn right from our childhood, and this can happen all through our lifespan, right? If we feel that there isn't a safe space for us to actually express the way we're feeling or the way we're thinking, or what our opinions are, and we do not have security of the agency that all of us possess, right, to be able to express and voice out what the experience is for us. If we don't feel that kind of safety and security, one of the most common ways people cope with that um lack, or cope with the lack of that security, is to just sort of stuff it in. And you often hear people say this, कि मैंने सब अंदर दबा के रखा है, or I've bottled things up, right? And then I have these moments where I just burst. And it's like a balloon, right? Like if you keep stuffing water in it, and you keep stretching it and stretching it and stretching it, the material starts thinning out, right? So a balloon that maybe has the capacity to, tolerate, pokes and jabs from, let's say, a pencil or a pen, the more and more you stretch it by filling in more and more water, metaphorically, the material is going to get thinner and thinner. And maybe just a touch on the balloon with your finger could actually burst that balloon, right? And so this level of tolerance being much lower now is, I think, because we've been stuffing so many of our emotional experiences inwards and not really resolving them, that all that stuff under the carpet or the stuff at the back of the closet that we've been hiding away has really worn our tolerance limit, and it's making us much more reactive. And while we might have the insight to not really react and to be really rational, we might have evolved that way, we often can't access those because we're that exhausted or we're that worn out by constantly containing those emotions even for ourselves, which is why the smallest things might set us off. And that brings me to your second question, which is how we take care of ourselves, right? And how self care then becomes a very important part of uh, taking care of not just your mind, but also your body, because your mind and body are very interconnected and they often impact each other. So, that self care could even mean paying attention to this balloon of yours that you're wearing so thin, right? So even bringing yourself to the point of awareness that, okay, I might be, taking too much and absorbing too much inwards, and maybe there is something that I'd like to talk about, or I'd like to even address in whichever form, that in itself can be an act of self care, because that is you giving your mind an opportunity to deal with the effects of these experiences. And often self-care is very romanticized, especially on social media of late, right? Where you see like a whole horde of posts on what self-care looks like. But self-care is essentially anything that helps you up yourself from a place of emotion where you might be feeling distressed. Now, this is often misconstrued with really unhealthy behaviors or really unhealthy mechanisms, right? Even things like guilting yourself or self blame to help yourself feel better is often misconstrued as an act of self care, but that's not it, right? The acts of self care that are actually adaptive for you and which are not going to cause you harm in the long run, right? Those are acts of self care. So, and there are five basic which we all need, which is your food that you eat, the water that you drink, the amount of rest or sleep that you get, other basics like light and air, like fresh air, right? These basics enable you to not just take care of your body, but also inadvertently take care of your mind. And even if it means that you need to take a minute away or 5 minutes away to just be by yourself, or to just do something that makes you feel that much better, but is healthy for you, right? Either for your mind or body, that can be an act of self care. It can just be stepping away from that distressing situation or that distressful thought even, and engaging yourself with something that uplifts you. So for me, often it's listening to a Pratik Kuhad song. His music is therapy for me, and Ashna can vouch for that because I've dragged her to many a concert where I have made her sway with me at the music, because it's just been an act of self-care for me, right? If I've had a very hard week at work, or if I've had a very hard week at home, or on a social front, I have probably called her up and said, "Have you listened to the new Pratik Kuhad song?" And then made her listen to it with me, right? So it can be something as small as that, or even just reaching out to your friend and saying that, hey, I'm not really doing that well today, or um, i'm not I'm not sure how I'm feeling, and being able to sort of uh, deconstruct that with your friend, because your friend is probably a safe space where you can feel comfortable enough to talk about the thing that's distressing you.
Great. I think that's been some pretty sound advice. And, more importantly, you're right about the whole. I loved the balloon metaphor. Keski, I want to thank you so much for being part of this, and for joining in and being my first ever
Absolutely, it's
interview.
been my pleasure.
And I look
It's been
forward
an
to calling
absolute
you
pleasure.
on. I look forward to bringing you on for
Absolutely.
more interviews, and definitely listen to that next Pratik Kuhad song.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ketki, for your
Okay,
time,
thank you so much, Ashna.
and take care.
Absolutely. I look forward to more interactions with you like this.